12 crashes that changed NASCAR forever. Buckle up as we explore crashes that left a permanent mark on NASCAR history. From airborne cars hitting catch fences at 200 miles per hour to drivers finishing the race on foot after hitting the barriers, here's my top 12. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's start with number 12. On February 18, during the final lap of the race, Dale Earnhardt, known as the Intimidator, lost his life in a crash that shook the motorsport world to its core. Earnhardt was in third place, strategically blocking the rest of the field to help his teammates Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr. secure the top two spots. As the pack roared through turn 4, Earnhardt's car made contact with Ken Schrader's, sending both vehicles into the wall at over 150 miles per hour. From the outside, it didn't seem like a particularly severe crash compared to some of the airborne wrecks early in the race. However, the impact angle and lack of modern safety equipment proved fatal for Earnhardt. The autopsy revealed a basilar skull fracture, a type of injury that had already claimed the lives of 3 NASCAR drivers before: Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin Jr., and Tony Roper. After that, NASCAR quickly implemented a series of safety measures that have since saved countless lives. One of the most significant changes was making the HANS, head and neck support device, mandatory for all drivers. This device stabilizes the head during crashes, reducing the risk of severe whiplash and skull fractures. Another major improvement was the introduction of SAFER, steel and foam energy reduction barriers designed to absorb the high energy of high-speed impacts. Previously, most tracks had concrete walls that offered little protection during crashes. These barriers have since become standard at nearly every NASCAR track, drastically improving driver safety. Earnhardt's crash also led to advancements in seatbelt technology. His seatbelt had reportedly torn upon impact, raising concerns about the quality of restraints used in NASCAR vehicles. New standards for seatbelt materials and configurations were introduced, ensuring greater reliability in the event of a crash. Statistically, the improvements that followed have been remarkable. In the 20 years since Earnhardt's death, no NASCAR Cup driver has lost their life during a race. This stands in stark contrast to the decades before, when fatal accidents were tragically common. At number 11, I put Bobby Allison's crash during the 1987 Winston 500 at Talladega Superspeedway. I think it fully changed how NASCAR approached speed on its fastest tracks. The race was already a high-speed spectacle, with Allison's car reaching speeds of over 210 miles per hour. On lap 22, Allison's car, running at full throttle, suffered a mechanical failure when a piece of debris cut through his rear tire. Losing control, his car veered sideways, caught air, and went airborne. What followed was nothing short of horrifying. His car flew into the catch fence at over 200 miles per hour, tearing through 100 feet of barrier and sending debris flying into the grandstands. Amazingly, the catch fence held, preventing what could have been an unimaginable tragedy. Several fans were injured, but miraculously, there were no fatalities. It was a close call, too close for NASCAR to ignore. Officials later admitted that if Allison's car had breached the fence, it could have been a catastrophic event, potentially forcing the sport to rethink its existence. This crash sparked immediate action. NASCAR introduced restrictor plates at Daytona and Talladega in 1988 to reduce speeds. These plates limited the amount of air and fuel flowing into the engine, effectively capping horsepower and keeping speeds below the 200 mph threshold. While restrictor plates drastically changed the racing dynamic, leading to closer pack racing and more frequent multi-car crashes, they were seen as a necessary compromise for safety. The effects were significant. Before the implementation of restrictor plates, top speeds were routinely over 210 miles per hour. With the plates, qualifying speeds dropped. For instance, Bill Elliott's 1987 Talladega pole speed of 212.809 miles per hour remains the fastest in NASCAR history, a record that will likely never be broken. By the way, remarkably, Bobby Allison walked away uninjured from this crash. Opening top 10, Adam Petty's tragic accident in 2000 was a heartbreaking moment in NASCAR history. At just 19 years old, Adam was a rising star and the 4th generation of the legendary Petty racing family. The accident happened during a practice session at New Hampshire International Speedway on May 12, 2000. Adam was preparing for a NASCAR Busch Series race when a mechanical failure caused his throttle to stick. Unable to decelerate, his car slammed head-on into the wall at full speed. The violent impact resulted in a basilar skull fracture, the same injury that would claim Dale Earnhardt's life less than a year later. One of the immediate outcomes of Adam's accident was the introduction of the kill switch system in race cars. This simple yet effective device allows drivers to shut off their engines in the event of a stuck throttle, preventing similar crashes. It became a mandatory feature in all NASCAR vehicles shortly after Adam's death. The loss of Adam Petty also brought attention to track safety. New Hampshire International Speedway underwent modifications to make it safer for drivers, including the addition of safer barriers in the years that followed. At number 9, we've got Jeff Bodin's crash in the 2000 Daytona 250 Truck Series. It is one of the most harrowing accidents in NASCAR history. The crash occurred on lap 57 as trucks were battling for position in the tightly packed field. As Bodin's truck was caught up in a chain reaction incident, Bodin lost control, but it was contact with Rob Morgan's truck that sent it careening into the catch fence at nearly 190 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. Bodin's truck went airborne, flipping end over end and tearing apart as it collided with the fencing. It basically disintegrated midair, scattering debris across the track and into the grandstands. To be honest, it looked more like an airplane crash than a motorsport incident. The catch fence, designed to protect spectators, did its job, but some debris still made its way into the stands, injuring 5 fans. Thankfully, none of the injuries were life-threatening. For Jeff Bodin, the situation was far grimmer. The remains of his truck, reduced to little more than the driver's compartment, skidded down the track before coming to a stop in flames. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, expecting the worst. Miraculously, Bodin survived the crash. He sustained serious injuries, including a broken wrist, cheekbone, and vertebra, but his life was spared. Bodin's crash prompted NASCAR to take a closer look at the structural integrity of its trucks and effectiveness of catch fences. One major focus became the reinforcement of catch fencing to better contain vehicles and debris in the event of future airborne crashes. Tracks began implementing stronger fencing with additional support to minimize the risk to fans. The crash also underscored the need for improved fire suppression systems. While Bodin's roll cage protected him from the initial impact, the flames that followed could have been deadly if safety crews had not acted so quickly. NASCAR enhanced its protocols for on-track emergencies, ensuring that fire response times are faster and more effective. For Jeff Bodin, the recovery was long and challenging, but his resilience became an inspiration to fans and fellow drivers. Remarkably, he returned to racing later that year, showing the grit that defined his career. Number 8 is Mike Harmon's 2002 crash during practice for a NASCAR Busch Series race at Bristol Motor Speedway. The crash happened during practice as Harmon was navigating turn 2 at high speed. Unknown to him, the track's crossover gates, which allows vehicles and personnel to cross the track during non-race times, hadn't been properly secured. As Harmon's car hit the wall, it slammed into the unsecured gates, which split his car in two upon impact. The rear half of the car was torn away, while the front section, including the driver's compartment, was thrown back onto the track. The destruction was catastrophic. Observers watching the practice session feared the worst, as it looked nearly impossible for someone to survive such a violent collision. The image of Harmon's car being split apart became one of the most memorable visuals in NASCAR history. Remarkably though, Harmon survived with minor injuries. This was largely thanks to the structural integrity of the car's roll cage, which shielded him from the devastating forces. This incident immediately raised serious questions about track safety, particularly concerning crossover gates. At the time, many tracks used metal gates that could open for maintenance vehicles and personnel, but were secured manually for racing activities. Crossover gates at all tracks were reevaluated, and many were redesigned or replaced entirely. Modern gates now feature reinforced construction and modern locking mechanisms to prevent similar incidents from happening. Tracks also introduce stricter protocols to ensure that gates are inspected and secured before any car takes to the track. Number 7 brings us to Rusty Wallace's dramatic flip at Talladega Superspeedway in 1993, one of the most mind-boggling crashes in NASCAR history. The incident occurred during the final lap of the Winston 500. Wallace was battling for position in a tight pack, and as they approached the tri-oval, Dale Earnhardt's iconic number 3 car made contact with Wallace's rear bumper. The slight nudge was enough to send Wallace's car spinning out of control at nearly 200 miles per hour. What followed was nothing short of terrifying. Wallace's car was lifted into the air, flipping down the front stretch. The vehicle barrel rolled multiple times, scattering debris across the track. The crash was so violent that it looked more like a stunt scene from a Hollywood action movie than a real-life racing incident. Fans and commentators were left in stunned silence, unsure if Wallace could have survived such a catastrophic wreck. Miraculously, Wallace emerged from the wreckage alive. Despite the violent nature of the crash, his injuries were limited to a broken wrist, a concussion, and cuts and bruises. Wallace's crash was a wake-up call for NASCAR regarding the dangers of airborne vehicles. Although there were stricter plates introduced after Bobby Allison's 1987 crash at reduced speeds, they also created closer racing, increasing the likelihood of multi-car wrecks and cars going airborne. NASCAR knew more had to be done to address the risks. In 1994, NASCAR introduced roof flaps, a direct response to incidents like Wallace's. These flaps deploy when a car spins or lifts, disrupting airflow and forcing the car back onto the ground. Roof flaps have since become a standard safety feature in all NASCAR vehicles and have significantly reduced the number of airborne crashes. Wallace, however, returned to racing quickly, continuing to compete at the highest level and winning races, but the Talladega flip remained a defining moment in his career. Number 6 is Ryan Newman's crash on the final lap of the 2020 Daytona 500. I think it is one of the most dramatic incidents in NASCAR's modern era. Newman was leading the race as the pack approached the checkered flag. Racing at speeds of over 190 miles per hour, he attempted to block Ryan Blaney, who was making a move for the lead. The two cars made contact, sending Newman spinning out of control. His car clipped the wall and flipped into the air, landing on its roof before being struck on the driver's side by Corey LaJoie's oncoming car at full speed. The second impact was devastating. The sheer force of LaJoie's car striking Newman's Ford Mustang caused sparks, debris, and parts to scatter across the track. Newman's car skidded down the track upside down before coming to a stop in flames. For a moment, the world held its breath. Fans, commentators, and teams feared the worst as emergency crews rushed to extract Newman from the mangled wreckage. He was rushed to Halifax Medical Center, just a few miles from the track. Remarkably, just 2 days after the crash, Newman walked out of the hospital, holding the hands of his two daughters. I should also mention that Ryan Newman returned to racing later that season. In the top 5, I thought Carl Edwards' airborne crash during the 2009 Aaron's 499 at Talladega Superspeedway. The dramatic crash occurred on the final lap of the race, with Edwards battling Brad Keselowski for the win. Heading into the tri-oval, Edwards attempts to block Keselowski's move on the inside line. However, their cars made contact, sending Edwards spinning at over 190 miles per hour. All of a sudden, Edwards' car became airborne, flipping onto the catch fence with violent force. The car hit the fence at an angle, tearing through the steel mesh and scattering debris into the stands. Pieces of the car flew into the grandstands, injuring 7 spectators. The fence, while preventing the car from entering the stands, sustained significant damage. Fans sitting near the crash described the incident as terrifying and said it was unlike anything they'd ever seen at a NASCAR race. Meanwhile, Edwards' car landed back on the track, sliding to a stop near the start-finish line. Miraculously, Edwards climbed out of the wreckage unscathed and jogged across the track to finish the race on foot, a moment that became iconic. Unfortunately, that didn't count and he didn't win that day. Number 4 is Richard Petty's violent flip during the 1988 Daytona 500. It blows my mind every time. The crash occurred during the middle stages of the race as Petty was running in a packed field. Coming off turn 4, he made contact with another car, which sent his number 43 Pontiac spinning at 190 miles per hour. The car hit the wall and immediately went airborne, flipping multiple times across the track. The crash didn't stop there. As Petty's car came to rest on the apron, it was struck at full speed by an oncoming vehicle, further damaging the wreckage and scattering even more debris. The impact was so severe that parts of the car, including the roof, were torn away. Remarkably, Petty survived the crash with only minor injuries, including bruises and a sore shoulder. His survival was largely due to the roll cage, which managed to keep the driver's compartment intact. In response to Petty's crash and similar incidents, NASCAR made several more important changes to improve driver safety. One of the most significant was the introduction of window nets, which had already been mandated after Richard Petty's 1970 crash at Darlington, but were further reinforced following this incident. Window nets prevent drivers' arms from flying out of the car during flips, reducing the risk of limb injuries. For Petty, the crash was a defining moment in his career. While he retired 4 years later in 1992, his survival and resilience became a symbol of the toughness required to compete in NASCAR. Coming in at number 3 is Austin Dillon's 2015 crash at Daytona International Speedway during the Coke Zero 400. The crash occurred on the final lap of the race, as the field was barreling toward the checkered flag. Drivers were jostling for position in a tightly packed group when Dillon's car was caught in the middle of the chaos. As the front runners crossed the finish line, contact between other cars caused Dillon's number 3 Chevrolet to spin and lift into the air. The car went airborne and collided with a catch fence at nearly 200 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. Dillon's car disintegrated upon hitting the fence, with the engine block and other debris flying across the track. The force of the crash left his vehicle reduced to little more than the driver's roll cage. Miraculously, Austin Dillon walked away from the crash with only minor injuries, a bruised tailbone and a sore forearm. However, the crash exposed vulnerabilities in NASCAR's safety measures, particularly regarding catch fences. While the fence prevented a larger tragedy, its failure to fully contain debris raised concerns. NASCAR and track officials immediately began re-evaluating fence designs, looking for ways to make them stronger and more effective at protecting fans without compromising visibility or racing experience. Number 2 is Elliott Sadler's jaw-dropping crash during the 2003 EA Sports 500 at Talladega Superspeedway. I believe it is one of the most catastrophic airborne accidents in NASCAR history. The crash occurred late in the race, as drivers battled for position in the tight pack racing Talladega is famous for. Sadler's number 38 M&M's Ford was in the top 3, pushing hard to secure a strong finish. As the pack entered the backstretch, Sadler's car was bumped from behind, causing it to spin and lift off the ground. What followed was a violent barrel roll that left fans and commentators stunned. The flips were so extreme that it seemed as though his car defied gravity. The impact with the ground after each roll caused parts of the car to break off and scatter across the track. Eventually, the car came to a stop on its wheels, leaving fans and safety crews holding their breath. Incredibly, Sadler was able to walk away from the wreck with no serious injuries. This crash further underscored the importance of NASCAR's aerodynamic safety measures, such as roof and hood flaps. These features were introduced in the 1990s to prevent cars from going airborne by disrupting airflow when a car spins. While these measures have significantly reduced the number of airborne crashes, Sadler's wreck showed that high-speed collisions can still overcome these safety features in extreme situations. Number 1 is Randy LaJoie's terrifying qualifying crash during the 1984 Daytona 500 qualifiers. To me, this remains the most dramatic incident in NASCAR history. LaJoie was competing in one of the two 125-mile qualifying races held at Daytona International Speedway, events designed to determine the starting grid for the Daytona 500. As a young and promising driver, he was pushing his number 7 car to the limit, trying to secure a strong position. However, while coming off of a corner at full speed, LaJoie lost control of his car after getting caught in the draft of another vehicle. His car veered sharply to the left and slammed into the low concrete wall separating the track from the infield. The impact was catastrophic. LaJoie's car, traveling at nearly 200 miles per hour, hit the wall with such force that the front end of the car disintegrated. Honestly, the vehicle was so badly damaged that it resembled a pile of scrap metal. Miraculously, LaJoie survived the crash. Although he sustained serious injuries and was hospitalized, his survival was largely due to sheer luck, as many of the safety features we talked about today were not yet in place. For Randy LaJoie, the crash was a career-defining moment. While he went on to have a successful career, including winning 2 Busch Series championships, the wreck became a stark reminder of risks he had to take to race NASCAR. Let me know if I forgot any crashes that should have made the list, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time!